Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 23rd of January of 2023. Today we have some interesting updates, so let's start. First we're going to start with Zaporozhye area, with this front line. I believe that these days this is one of the most interesting part of Ukraine, and today we have more details about this area, so let's discuss them. But first of all, let's start from the beginning. If you remember, a few days ago, the Russian sources announced about greatest offensive operation in the Zaporozhye area, and as a result of that offensive operation, the Russians managed to develop their bridgehead in this area up to 7 or at some parts of the front line up to 8 kilometers from the beginning, from the zero line, let's call it like this. And as a result of that attack, as of first day of offensive operation, the Russians established control, according to the Russian sources, over Mali Sherbaki, Sherbaki, Novoandreevka, Novodanilovka, Malotokmachka, and Belogorye, over all these towns. And there were a lot of talks, a lot of plans, a lot of big arrows, a lot of beautiful plans and so on. And we were expecting for more updates from this front line. And the next 24 hours after that, those updates were very difficult, at least for me, because it was very strange and very difficult, because after those updates, we haven't received anything from this front line, and it was very strange and very difficult to understand. And after the first 24 hours, after the updates, after the those announcement of that offensive operation, I start thinking that something went wrong, or something was wrong with this offensive operation. And yesterday we received the first updates from this front line, where the Russians were saying that the towns like Mali Sherbaki and Sherbaki wasn't taken by the Russians, and as a result of a Russian offensive operation, they just managed to push the Ukrainians to step back from these towns. But from the other side, the Russians haven't entered these towns as well, because all these towns is under fire control of Ukrainian artillery systems that located on the north of this road. So the Ukrainians stepped back, went back. Maybe the Russians made an attempt to enter these towns, but then the Ukrainians started to attack massively this town with artillery, and that forced the Russians to step back as well. And also that situation forced the Russians to continue artillery duels in this area, because they understood that they are no longer able to enter these towns without suppressing of Ukrainian artillery system. And so by tomorrow evening, we received some confirmation that all these towns like Stepovoye, Mali, Sherbaki, all these towns that located on the west from Orekhov are in the gray zone. But the Russians also reported about some updates about Kamyanskaya. They reported that they managed to cross the river, they managed to cross the bay, and that now there are clashes inside of Kamyanskaya. After I completed my video, yesterday video, there was some updates that Kamyanskaya was taken by the Russians. As you can see, this update appeared late after I finished with my video. And so there was like some piece of news that the Russians established control over Kamyanskaya. But today, now at 7 p.m. at 7:30 of local time, we have the real picture of this area, and the picture of this area says that the Russians they don't control any of these towns. The Russians don't have control over Kamyanskaya. They haven't entered Stepovoye. They haven't entered Mali Sherbaki. The Russians haven't entered Novoandreevka, Novodanilovka, Malotokmachka, Belogorovka. The Russians haven't entered any of these towns. The thing is that all these towns are in the gray zone. The thing is, when the Russians start movement, they managed to break the first line of defense. To tell the truth, it's just like this, some kind of sentence that maybe lots of you read on the newspapers or Telegram channels, or you heard these words from military experts, that the Russians managed to break the first line of defense. But if you ask me, to tell the truth, I don't know where exactly this first line is located. I don't know. So maybe it's just words. I believe that the Russians managed to develop some progress and to get as close as possible to Orekhov, maybe, but for now they don't control any of these towns that we talk like few days in a row. And this is another strange thing from this area. So the Ukrainians stepped back from the first defense line. The Russians haven't entered any of these towns because of very close artillery control over every single town in this area. But this is not the most important thing. I believe that there is something very strange with this operation, with all this situation. And at least when talking about today, I have completely different opinion about Orekhov operation, about Orekhov Gulyai Polya offensive operation, reading quotes, because during these hours, during these days, there were at least two interesting updates from the West, from Ukraine at the same time, at the same area, in the same area, at the same time, and so on. First of all, when talking about Zaporozhye area, there is an icon in this area, this one, and this icon is in Russian. It says like surrendering process, that a lot of people from this front line during the first wave of offensive operation from the Russian side surrendered in this area. And some military experts reported, and if you are able to read this in Russian, you will see that, not this one, but this icon, that two Ukrainian soldiers turn their side and join Russian army. It's like an icon showing at this area that two, but you need, if I remember when this icon was published the first time, it was written not like this. I believe that this icon have been edited since the creation of this icon. I believe that the creator of this map have such possibility. The thing is that the original text of this icon was that two Ukrainian officers turned their side and joined Russian army. As you can see, it's completely different situation when the Ukrainian soldiers join Russian army, and on the other side when Ukrainian officers join Russian army. But you need also read all these things in quotes. I believe if even such situation took place, like Ukrainian officers took Russian side and so on, I believe that it was some kind of, let's say, instruction, or how to call it, evacuation operation of Russian intelligence officers. I believe so. And now I believe that, of course, the next few days will show the real picture in Orekhov front line. I believe so. But something tells me, and furthermore, don't forget one important thing, that this area, when talking about Kamyansk and Orekhov, exactly this area between these two towns, is the only place in Ukraine where the civilians are able to cross the front line. So let's say you're a civilian from Zaporozhye and you have relatives or family somewhere in Melitopol, and you want to go, or you want to enter Zaporozhye area because you have their home, your own like land or something like this. You are tired to live on the territory of Ukraine because you don't have job, you don't have anything, and you are forced to go back, to return back on the territory under Russian control. This town, Kamyanska, is the only place where you are able to cross the front line without being killed, because there is some kind of, like, let's say, border between two countries, let's call it like this. And the same situation from the Russian side. If you can't live under Russian, let's say, occupation or under Russian control, you are able to leave this territory, and this place, Kamyansk, is the only place. Kamyansk, Lapko, this ground, this territory is the only territory you are able to cross, and from this area you are able to move on the territory that under Ukrainian control. So this situation with this offensive operation in the place where the only possible way to communicate between Ukraine and Russia is very suspicious, to tell the truth. And this information about two Ukrainian officers who decided to join Russian army is also very suspicious. As I see, it's completely speculation. I believe that we won't find this information anywhere else. We won't find any improvements, and I think that I won't be able to give you any evidence of improvements as well. I believe maybe in 10 or 20 and 30 years, when the archives will be opened, we will see the real situation about this offensive operation. But I believe that these two Ukrainian officers who turned their side was just extraction operation. I believe that maybe these two Ukrainian officers had very interesting information that they couldn't provide using any type of communication. They had some information, they need to provide them this information directly to Russian army, and this offensive operation in Orekhov was just a support operation of extraction of these two special agents that were serving in Ukrainian army. This is my complete, I don't know, Steven Spielberg, I don't know, film or something like this, but this is the only thing that can explain this balagan or this, I don't know, this art near Orekhov without any success, progress with such a noise around this situation and so on. Furthermore, and this is not the end of this story, another important update we received today after like 2 days of special operation in Orekhov. Today the Russian sources reported that the Ukrainians, we know that Ukrainians receive a lot of Western weapons, and the most important tanks and Bradleys and Strykers are not the most important type of weapon. We understand that the most important type of weapon that Ukrainian receives is not even the Patriot it's themselves. The most important is the rockets or missiles. This is the most important part of supply, because this is the missile war. And who has the better missiles and drones, this side will win this special operation, this war, whatever you call this. And the Ukrainians receive missiles for Patriots, for every single type of air defense system they have right now. They receive a lot of types from Western countries, from Germany, from Poland, from United Kingdom, from United States of America. A lot of countries supplied Ukraine from Italy and many other countries. So these systems need rockets. This is one important thing. Another, the Ukrainians have HIMARS systems. HIMARS systems need rockets as well. And the problem is that the last few months and weeks of special operations show us that the Russians are pretty successful by targeting and finding and spotting all these rockets, missiles, their depot and so on, and they destroyed them very successfully. They destroyed a lot. I'm not saying that every single rocket were destroyed. The Ukrainians still have a lot of rockets. And today the Russian sources reported that the Ukrainians, to prevent losing these rockets and missiles, they took a decision to hide these missiles in the basements, or if we can call these territories like this, of nuclear power plants. As we know, the Ukrainians still have 4 nuclear power plants, 3 active and 1 deactivated. It's South Ukrainian, 2 nuclear power plant, 1 in Vinnytsia, another in Rivno, and of course Chernobyl is a nuclear power plant that are no longer working. But anyway, this is also a very powerful fortification, and it's very difficult to get the basement or the levels that located underground, and it's the perfect place to accumulate and hide rockets, missiles on the territory of Ukraine as close as possible to the front line. I believe that a lot of such rockets are deployed on the South Ukrainian nuclear power plant, because this power plant is very close to the border. And as you can see, this information we received right after, let's say, Orekhov special extraction operation, where 2 Ukrainian officers decided to change their flag and to join the Russian army. I believe that maybe that was information that these officers provided the Russians, and now the Russians know exactly where the Ukrainians hide all the types of rockets and many other Western weapons to continue this special operation from the Ukrainian side. So this is my complete speculation about Orykhov situation. This may be completely fake information. You need to understand that. I just tried to explain myself that balagan that took place around Orykhov. Of course, maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe there are very heavy clashes right now and just the parties try to keep some silence mode and fog of war because it's so complicated, so important, so nobody wants to provide any information. And we will see some information a day or two later. But I believe that there are nothing like this. I believe that everything has ended. And the most important for the Russians, they managed to extract two officers of their own intelligence officers from Ukrainian side. This is the thing that took place in Orykhov, and the situation about the rockets that the Ukrainians are hiding in the basement of nuclear power plants, and that's it. And when talking about Zaporozhye front line, the Ukrainians lost just 30 soldiers and 3 armored vehicles in this area and 1 Grad system. When talking about Dnipro direction, as you can see, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours they lost 1 HIMARS system in this area. And that's it about Dnipro and Zaporozhye. We'll see. Very interesting. And we will return back to this Zaporozhye, Dnipro at the end of this video. But now let's discuss the situation on the ground and other front lines. When talking about the front lines, the situation are stable. The only place where the Russians still have progress, and they have progress on the ground, is the area around Bakhmut. The Russians try to develop their offensive operation from Klishchevka in direction of Ivanovska in this area. I'm not sure that the Russians are able to take this Ivanovska in a day or in a two, but they're moving in this direction. Of course, the main goal the Russians want to achieve in this direction is to now they have already established artillery control over this road, and they have cut, to tell the truth, they haven't cut, but they have increased the losses of Ukrainians if they use this road. The Ukrainians still use this road. I believe it's very difficult to establish 24 hours fire control without any stop attacking this road. It's very difficult anyway. So that's why the Ukrainians, if they see that there is some pause between artillery attacks, they start movement anyway. It's like it works like that. But the Russians have some control over this road, and now they're trying to move to the north along this road and to get as close as possible to Ivanovska. If you ask me, I'll give my opinion. I'm not sure that the Russians are able to take this town, because they will appear on the crossfire of 3 towns, like in strict attack, direct attack, even by tanks, not just by artilleries. But to establish more closer contact, more closer control over this, more close control over this road, I believe it possible. Maybe if the Russians are able to secure their left flank and to get as close as possible, or maybe to take control over Belogorod, Delievka, and maybe over to get very close to Stupachki. In this case, they are able to take Ivanovska, but first they need to secure the flanks. For now, it is very far. Securing of the left flank is very far. Operation is very far from the current situation we have. And furthermore, when talking about the north, there are still the same situation. The Russians attack in the direction of Yagodne, Verkhovka, Paraskoivka, Krasnogora, Blagodatne, all these towns, but without progress. And the Ukrainians keep their reserve there. They're stopping the Russians and not giving them opportunities to take the town. There are very heavy clashes. Let's count more days for this operation. Anyway, the Russians will be able to take these towns, but for now, no progress. But when talking about movements to the north, the Russians are more successful in this direction. And the main reason is that there are no big towns, just small villages. And when talking about today, the Russians established control over this village, Krasna Polovka. And this information was confirmed by the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation. That means that we can rely on this information. It's pretty, I believe that 100% sure that it's true. And now the Russians can attack at least 4 towns, like Vasyukovka, Sakovantseti, Mykolaievka, and Razdolovka. And all these towns, I believe that these days are under very heavy pressure. And if we are talking about this area, of course, Razdolovka, any of these towns are important, because the fall of any of these four towns can lead to the entire collapse of this front line. When talking about Donetsk front line, the Ukraine lost around 60 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, 2 artillery systems, 1 D-30, 1 Stab B artillery, all the Soviet systems, as you can see, and another radar in this area. So I believe that the most important loss from the Ukrainian side is another radar, ANTPQ-50. Now let's talk about Liman front line. As you can see, the Ukrainian lost another few radars in this area to ANTPQ-37 and ANTPQ-50 in this area. The Ukraine lost around 70 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems, as I describe you right now. And the thing is that there are one more time, there are a lot of Ukrainian soldiers in this forest. They are ready to start of storming of Kremina, and the Russians just attacking this forest, and this is the main air accumulation area. The Russians, it's very difficult to see the forces through this forest. The Ukrainians deployed a lot of brigades in this area, 18th, 95th, and many others, I believe. So when talking about Kupiansk front line, the Ukrainians are moving more and more armored vehicles to the Kupiansk. For now, the military experts don't understand, or the Ukrainians plans to continue offensive operation, or they just want to secure the flanks against the Russian counter-offensive operation. For now, it's very difficult to understand what are they planning to do in this area and what the Russians are planning to do in this area. So that's it about the situation on the ground. Now let's return back to Zaporozhye area, not to Zaporozhye but to Dnipro River. And today the Britain intelligence, United Kingdom intelligence, provided the Ukrainian militaries, authorities, another intelligence information, and they provided them the things that we discussed a few videos ago. If you remember, a few videos ago, when right exactly at the same time when the Russians started offensive operation in Orekhov, or special extraction operation or something like this, I told you that the main thing that the Russians want to achieve is to block Dnipro River. I told you that first to attack from the south, to block Zaporozhye and Dnipro themselves. This let's draw on the Western sources map. To attack to the north and to cut these railroads and so on. And another operation, according to my understanding, was to attack from the north and to cut the Kiev bridges and Kiev railroads. And the next thing that I told you, that there are still a lot of places to cross Dnipro River. There are Cherkasy, Kremenchuk, and Skamyansk, some towns, Kanyev, and I told you that if the Russians are able to block these towns from the south and from the north, and when talking about these bridges will be destroyed by the Russians, because there are no other option how to block the supply of Western weapons to the Donbass. And today, the United Kingdom intelligence provided the Ukrainians information that the Russians started discussions, or starting some investigations, or maybe they have already completed this investigation. I believe that they started discussions of destroying every single bridge on the Dnipro River. So the Russians have destroyed or reduced as much as possible the energy facilities, but the Ukrainians still have light, still have no problems with redeploying of their army along the railroads, because they have nuclear power plant that the Russians can't attack because of many reasons. And one of the most important, they can't just start a nuclear war by attacking nuclear power plants. Another thing, that nuclear power plants have a lot of depot in the basement of missiles, and also the Russians today reported that one thing, if we attack these nuclear power plants, these basements, this warehouse, but another thing, what will happen if some of these shell or these missiles will detonate itself without Russian influence on that. Who knows what is going to be with the nuclear power plants in this case. Anyway, so the Russians start discussion about destroying the bridges along the Dnieper River. And to tell the truth, as I see the real situation, I believe that maybe the time has come. Maybe the time has come. Maybe the time has come to understand and to accept for the Russians that there is a very high chance, very high risk that they are not able to take control over entire Ukraine. Sometimes it's very difficult to accept this information, at least for those who support the Russians. But as I see, maybe at this stage of maybe this is the reason why the Russians didn't destroy. I'm not saying that, you need to understand me correctly. Maybe this is the reason why the Russians didn't destroy the bridges before, because I believe that on some spirit level, on some brain level, the Russians associates the bridges that crossing the river with their plan to take control over entire Ukraine. And by cutting these bridges, it's like for themselves to say themselves that we are not planning to cross the river. So maybe this is the reason why the Russians didn't destroy these bridges in the past, because by destroying these bridges, it's like to tell themselves, okay, we understand we are not able to take entire Ukraine. Let's destroy the bridges and take at least the part that we are able to take, and to where we can destroy the Ukraine army. But it's not very smart to think like this. There are a lot of ways to, if you want to take control of entire Ukraine, the bridges. Anyway, if Ukrainians understand that they're stepping back and they're forced to retreat, they will destroy these bridges by themselves. Anyway, the Russians won't receive any single bridge in this area. Every single will be destroyed, everyone. So anyway, I believe that it's time to start destroying the bridges for the Russians if they want to break the situation. Because if they're able to do this, I'm not sure that the Ukrainians will be able to. It will cause a lot of damage to Ukrainian logistics. It will cause a lot of damage to Ukrainian logistics. This is first thing. Another thing, important thing. You know what? That today I read a very interesting article, and I find out that the Ukrainians don't have problems with the manpower at all. The Ukrainians have a lot of manpower. The only problem that Ukrainians have is armored vehicles, artillery system, any type of weapon. I'm not saying just about Western weapon. Believe me, if the Ukrainians had old Soviet weapon like tanks, T-72 and all these artilleries and shell, they wouldn't ask the Western countries to help them. They would fight with the things they have. They have a lot of manpower. And the Ukrainians, these days, they're doing another wave of mobilization, and they're planning by February to mobilize another 100,000 soldiers, and they will completely replace all their losses during the winter campaign, during battle for Bakhmut and Solidar, and they will receive everything they need. They will receive modern tanks, modern weapons, modern rockets, modern air defense system, and now this year, somewhere on summer and spring, we are going to see a real war between NATO and Russia. Yes, we won't see, let's say, when talking about manpower, we won't see manpower from Poland, but we have a lot of volunteers from Poland. Let's say we won't see like regular soldiers from United Kingdom, from NATO countries. We will see just Ukrainians, a lot of volunteers from all over the world. But we will see a lot of officers, a lot of instructors from NATO countries with the Western weapon. It's going to be a real war between NATO and Russia. And at this point of time, if NATO see that using NATO weapon, using NATO instructors, officers, using just Ukrainian manpower, if they are able to win, and they see that they win the Russians on the ground, what can stop them to declare a real operation from NATO's side and to join this Ukraine with real NATO forces? Nobody can stop them, and we will see this in the next months. And then they're going to, believe me, we will see F-16 on Ukraine. We will see every single tank in Abrams and Challenger and Leopard in Ukraine. We'll see everything. And when talking about the Russians, It's also very interesting. Today I've read a very interesting article about the Ukrainian losses. You know that I tried to make my own table, and the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation provide their own information. They're not providing information about the losses among manpower, but they're showing the losses. They're showing us the losses among tanks, among artillery systems, and so on. And today there was a lot of very interesting article. I'll try to explain to you. Let's say the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation are saying that since the beginning of special operations, they managed to destroy something a little bit less than 8,000 tanks and fighting machines. So it's like armored vehicles, real armored vehicles, not just the cars like Toyota or something like this, but real armored vehicles like Bradley Striker or the BMP-1, BMP-2 and something like this. A little bit less than 8,000 units. And the author of that article told us that 8,000 of such types of weapon is around 2 tanks armies or 6 regular armies. So 8,000 tanks plus armored vehicles is something around 2 tank armies or 6 regular armies. Also, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of these clashes, the Russians destroyed around 8,000 special vehicles. And this I'm talking about maybe trucks, I don't know. But he told that this is the same, almost 6 armies. He told us that the Russians destroyed up something around 400 air defense systems. It's around 1 air defense army. The Russians destroyed around a little bit less than 400 airplanes and something around 200 helicopters. It's 2 air armies. Imagine yourself. And then he made all his calculations, and he told that since the beginning of special military operation, and according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, according to their numbers they're providing us, since the beginning the Russians managed to destroy up to 23 fulfilled armies. 23 armies, just imagine yourself. 23 armies were destroyed since the beginning of special operation. Ukrainian armies. 23 Ukrainian armies. Just imagine yourself how much work were completed since the beginning, and as we can see, this work haven't been finished. We see that now the Western countries are going to provide another 20-30 armies on the territory of Ukraine. I'm not talking about manpower, we're just talking about vehicles. And also he made a very interesting comparison. He told that all these numbers is almost the same thing as when comparing with the Second World War. It's almost the same if the Russians managed to destroy 4 German armies, real Germany armies during the 42-43. Imagine yourself, just for 1 year, 4 armies. It's very interesting comparison, very interesting analysis. And from one side, we can say that maybe all these numbers are complete speculation. I believe these numbers. You may not. It's up to you. It's up to every one of us to believe or not. But we see how much the Russians have done, but there is still a lot of job to do. And we see that this process might be endless. Believe me, it might be endless. So anyway, sooner or later we're going to see. Because anyway, the Western countries are saying that the next 2-3 weeks are going to be the most important weeks in this military special operation. And the importance of these weeks is that if the Ukrainians are able to hold the Russian and to stand against the Russian greatest offensive operation, the Western countries still believes that the Russians are going to start this greatest offensive operation. Then they will receive anything they want, and then the Ukrainians will start counter-offensive operation and will return everything back, or something like this. Anyway, we'll see. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.